The idea that I should be a witness, not for my husband, but for the prosecution, that I should swear Leonard was guilty.
Have you ever wondered what Hollywood's golden age really looked like behind all that glitter? The gowns, the red carpets, the perfect smiles, none of it showed the truth. Beneath the spotlight were women whose real lives could never be told, whose love stories had to be hidden behind curtains and code words. But secrets have a funny way of surviving time. And once you hear who they were, you'll never see those perfect stars the same way again. Greta Garbo.
But it had been so enchanting to be a woman, not a queen, just a woman in a man's arms.
Greta Garbo wasn't just mysterious. She was practically a legend wrapped in fog. The Swedish-born star ruled the silent era with her piercing stare and haunting beauty, but her real life was quieter, lonelier, and far more daring than any of her films. Off-screen, Garbo formed a passionate bond with playwright Mercedes Acosta. Their letters, written in secret, revealed a connection filled with tenderness and longing that the studio system would never allow her to express publicly. Garbo guarded her privacy like a fortress. She refused interviews, dodged premieres, and lived as if every question was a threat. MGM crafted her image as the unattainable goddess, but that distance was really a disguise, a way to keep her true self safe in an unforgiving world. Even her closest friends only saw what she allowed. Beneath the cool exterior, there was a woman who wanted to love freely but couldn't. When Garbo retired early, people called her eccentric. Maybe she was just tired of pretending. In the end, her greatest performance wasn't in a film, it was in life, playing the role the world demanded while quietly writing her own forbidden story. Marlene Dietrich.
It's wonderful this time of the year. You'd like it there.
Marlene Dietrich didn't just bend Hollywood's rules, she broke them with a wink. With her tailored suits, smoky voice, and confidence that could stop traffic, she was unlike any other star of the 1930s. On screen, she played the ultimate seductress. Off screen, she lived exactly as she pleased, forming deep relationships with both men and women. She never apologized for being herself. Dietrich was known to stroll into nightclubs wearing tuxedos, kiss whoever she pleased, and walk out like she owned the place. Her daughter later said that everyone in Hollywood knew about her private life, but no one dared to challenge her. She was too powerful, too magnetic, too unpredictable. She was linked romantically to writers, musicians, and even fellow star Greta Garbo, though both denied it. But insiders said their chemistry was undeniable. Their rivalry may be something more. In an era that demanded secrecy, Dietrich turned her life into art, part performance, part rebellion. When asked about morality, she once replied, "I am not a moralist." And she wasn't. She was a revolutionary in heels, rewriting what womanhood could look like long before anyone dared to say the word freedom out loud. Barbara Stanwyck.
I can't stand it anymore. What if they do hang me?
Barbara Stanwyck could make toughness look glamorous. She was sharp, commanding, and so self-assured that even her male co-stars seemed to shrink beside her. But beneath that iron confidence was a private life built on secrets carefully protected by studio contracts. Her marriage to actor Robert Taylor was rumored to be one of convenience, a perfect Hollywood arrangement that kept the gossip columns satisfied while her real affections were whispered about in quiet corners. For years, Stanwyck was linked to women within the industry, including her publicist, Helen Ferguson. She also lived with female companions long after her divorce, which was rare for the time. Those who knew her described her as loyal but distant, a woman who built walls not to keep people out, but to keep her truth hidden from a judgmental world. Her roles in films like Double Indemnity and Sorry Wrong Number showed women who didn't need saving, and that wasn't an accident. Stanwyck's screen strength came from real experience. She knew what it meant to live on her own terms. In the end, she may have sacrificed emotional freedom for survival in a business that punished honesty. But even in silence, she stood as one of Hollywood's most quietly defiant figures. Tallulah Bankhead.
I hate to bother you like this, but could I use your telephone? I'm your new neighbor, Tallulah Bankhead.
Tallulah Bankhead was the wild spirit Hollywood could never quite tame. Southern-born, loud, and completely fearless, she lived her life like a party that never ended. Her wit could cut through glass, and her charm made even her harshest critics adore her. But the real Tallulah was far more daring than her screen image ever showed. She moved in elite circles where gossip was constant and she didn't seem to care. Bankhead openly formed romantic relationships with both men and women, including actresses and singers like Billie Holiday. While others hid, she laughed at the idea of secrecy. She famously once quipped, "I'm as pure as the driven slush." It was her way of saying, "Judge me if you dare." Studios tried to contain her, but Bankhead refused to be polished into something she wasn't. Her lifestyle, her language, even her friends, all of it defied the moral codes of the 1940s. Yet her talent was undeniable. Whether on stage or screen, she was electric, raw, and alive. Bankhead wasn't just a rebel, she was a blueprint for freedom in a world that demanded mass. She didn't survive Hollywood's expectations. She out-talked them, out-drank them, and laughed in their faces while doing it. Joan Crawford.
It'll be news to Stephen. Personally, I'm glad, you know. I've kept still because I knew it wouldn't.
Joan Crawford built her empire on ambition. Every gesture, every glance, every photograph was designed for control. She rose from poverty to stardom through sheer force of will, and no one in Hollywood worked harder to maintain her image. But behind that iron discipline were secrets she guarded like treasure. Married multiple times, Crawford's love life was a studio spectacle. But beneath the glamorous facades were whispers, rumors of deep relationships with women, including Barbara Stanwyck and Claudette Colbert. Even her adopted daughter, Christina, hinted in her memoir that Crawford's emotional connections often blurred traditional boundaries. In private, Crawford's charm was magnetic. She was known to hold court at her home, commanding attention and loyalty in equal measure. Those who worked with her said she could be both generous and terrifying, a woman who knew exactly what she had to hide to stay on top. Crawford never confirmed the rumors, of course. She didn't need to. The power was in the mystery. She built her legacy on control, but her truest rebellion might have been the things she refused to explain. In a world that demanded labels, Joan Crawford kept the one thing that mattered entirely, her truth. Claudette Colbert.
Just 200 pounds of mother fighting to keep her baby. 240 years of...
Claudette Colbert had the kind of charm that made audiences fall in love instantly. Her timing, her elegance, her effortless wit, it all screamed old Hollywood perfection. But off-screen, Colbert was far more complex than the studio-approved image of the wholesome leading lady. Married to Joel Pressman, a director who spent much of his life on the East Coast, Colbert quietly built her own world out west, one that didn't quite match her public persona. For decades, she lived with her close friend Vera Hall, a wealthy socialite. The two shared homes in Palm Springs and New York, described by insiders as inseparable. Hollywood called it companionship, but those who knew the truth called it something deeper. Rumors swirled that Claudette was also linked to women like Marlene Dietrich and Joan Crawford, placing her among a hidden network of powerful women protecting one another. Unlike many of her peers, Colbert never denied the whispers, she simply ignored them. Her grace, wit, and professionalism made her untouchable. In the end, her true genius wasn't just in front of the camera, it was in how she lived her truth quietly, beautifully, and without apology. Kay Francis.
Morton,
Yes, lady.
a bottle of champagne and 2 glasses in my boudoir.
Kay Francis was Warner Brothers' top-earning actress in the early 1930s, known for her low voice, regal beauty, and magnetic presence. But her real story didn't play out under studio lights, it unfolded behind them. Francis kept diaries filled with unfiltered honesty about her emotions, relationships, and struggles with conformity. Her private notes hinted at a woman who loved freely both men and women and refused to let gossip define her. She was close to director Dorothy Arzner, one of Hollywood's few openly gay creatives, and their relationship was said to have been more than professional. Within industry circles, Francis was part of the Sewing Circle, a coded name for the secret network of women who loved women. Warner Brothers knew her appeal came from her sophistication and mystery, so they didn't pry. Francis mastered the art of illusion, appearing every bit the glamorous movie queen while hiding in plain sight. She once wrote that she felt trapped between who I am and what they need me to be. That conflict defined her career and her legacy, a woman who lived honestly even if no one was allowed to see it. Alla Nazimova. Alla Nazimova was more than an actress, she was an empire. A pioneer of silent cinema, a director, a producer, and one of the earliest women to own her own studio, Nazimova wasn't afraid of anything except exposure. Yet behind the grand persona, she quietly created Hollywood's first sanctuary for queer women. She coined the term sewing circle to describe the underground community of actresses, writers, and artists who loved other women but couldn't say so publicly. Nazimova's home on Sunset Boulevard, called the Garden of Allah, became a safe haven where freedom reigned. She lived openly with designer Glisa Marshall and had known affairs with actresses like Eva Le Gallienne and writer Mercedes de Acosta. Her courage came at a cost. When Hollywood began consolidating under strict moral codes, Nazimova's career faded. But her legacy as a protector and pioneer outlasted any film reel. She gave power to those who had none, and built a world where love, even forbidden love, could exist without shame. In many ways, she wasn't hiding, she was leading from the shadows. Dorothy Arzner. Dorothy Arzner didn't just work in Hollywood, she ruled it quietly from behind the camera. The only female director working steadily in the studio system during the 1920s through 40s, Arzner was a genius with a sharp mind and an even sharper sense of self. She dressed in suits, drove a convertible, and refused to hide her relationship with choreographer Marion Morgan, who lived with her for decades. Hollywood insiders knew exactly who she was, but no one dared to confront her. She was too talented to lose. Arzner directed films like Christopher Strong and Dance Girl Dance, shaping careers for stars like Katharine Hepburn and Lucille Ball, while embedding subtle themes of female independence and desire into her work. She mentored countless actresses, offering guidance and safety to those who were afraid to live authentically. While most played along with the system, Arzner simply rewrote the script. She was Hollywood's first openly lesbian director, though few dared to say it. She didn't need labels, she let her life speak for itself. In a world of conformity, Dorothy Arzner stood as proof that talent could make even the most rigid doors open. Mercedes de Acosta. Mercedes de Acosta never starred in films, but she's the reason many stars dared to live. A writer, poet, and playwright, she became Hollywood's most infamous secret, the woman behind the letters, the muse behind the mystery. She had intense emotional relationships with some of the biggest names in classic cinema, including Greta Garbo, Marlene Dietrich, and Alla Nazimova. Her love letters to Garbo revealed a side of the actress the public never saw: vulnerable, longing, and deeply human. Studios despised Mercedes, calling her dangerous because she represented everything they wanted to suppress: truth. When she published a memoir hinting at her affairs, Hollywood closed its doors to her. But history later vindicated her. She lived fearlessly at a time when fear ruled everything. Mercedes wasn't just part of queer Hollywood, she was its heartbeat. The stars she inspired became legends, but she was the one who dared to write the truth even when it cost her everything. Agnes Moorehead.
I'll try. I promise. I really will try.
Agnes Moorehead could turn a single look into thunder. Known to modern audiences as Endora from Bewitched, she was one of the most versatile and respected actresses of her time. But off-screen, she led a life shrouded in dignified secrecy. Though married briefly, Moorehead never remarried and lived for decades with female companions, most notably actress Debbie Brown. She was known within industry circles as part of the inner sewing circle, a quiet alliance of women who lived on their own terms. Friends described her as deeply spiritual and reserved, yet fiercely protective of her privacy. Moorehead's elegance made her untouchable to gossip columnists. She built her reputation on discipline and skill, refusing to feed the rumor mill. But those who worked with her often said her greatest strength wasn't just talent, it was courage. In a town obsessed with image, she mastered the art of saying everything by saying nothing. Her legacy isn't just in her performances, but in her quiet defiance, a woman who lived honestly in a dishonest era. Peg Entwistle. Peg Entwistle's story has become one of Hollywood's most haunting legends. But before she became a symbol of the industry's dark side, she was a bright, ambitious actress with dreams far bigger than the world allowed her. Peg worked in the New York theater scene, where queer relationships were common but hidden behind polite silence. Those who knew her spoke of her deep emotional ties with female colleagues, connections that were more than friendship in a time when such love couldn't be named. When she moved to Hollywood, she found the dream far colder than the lights that promised it. Though she only appeared in one film, her charisma and bravery made her unforgettable to those who met her. Many historians now look back at Peg's short career as symbolic of how suffocating Hollywood's moral codes could be, especially for women who love differently. She may not have lived to see her legacy honored, but her story continues to echo through every untold truth that followed. Louise Brooks. Louise Brooks was fire wrapped in silk, the flapper who defined the jazz age with that iconic bob and smoldering stare in Pandora's box wasn't just ahead of her time, she was from another world entirely. Brooks was blunt, fearless, and immune to hypocrisy. She spoke openly about love, passion, and identity in interviews and essays long after her Hollywood career ended. Her relationships with women, including actress Peggy Fears, were known in artistic circles but never mentioned by the press. She despised Hollywood's moral double standards and walked away from the industry rather than pretend to be someone she wasn't. In later years, she wrote powerfully about her experiences exposing the exploitation and cruelty hidden behind glamour. Her honesty cost her fame, but earned her immortality. Louise Brooks didn't whisper her truth, she lived it out loud, even if the world refused to listen. She wasn't just a film icon, she was rebellion personified decades before rebellion had a name. Margaret Lindsay. Margaret Lindsay was the kind of actress Hollywood adored, refined, polite, and endlessly professional. She starred in a string of dramas and comedies throughout the 1930s and 40s, but her personal life stayed mysteriously out of view. Lindsay never married and instead shared her home with fellow actress Mary McCarty for years. They appeared at industry events together, hosted dinners, and were seen as inseparable. Insiders quietly acknowledged them as a couple, though the press kept their distance, perhaps out of respect or fear of scandal. Unlike many stars who fought the system, Lindsay chose grace over confrontation. She lived quietly, kept her career steady, and avoided interviews that veered into personal territory. In the end, her legacy isn't written in headlines, but in how she carried herself with dignity, discretion, and quiet pride. She proved that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it simply endures. Arden. Arden had wit sharper than a blade and delivery smoother than silk. Known for her quick-tongue roles in Mildred Pierce and Our Miss Brooks, she was Hollywood's queen of clever comebacks. But off-screen, her charm concealed a life lived on delicate balance. Arden married and adopted children, but insiders whispered about her close, emotional ties to women within the industry. She hosted private gatherings where actresses could be themselves, safe from studio spies and gossip reporters. Those who attended described her as protective, loyal, and understanding of the quiet battles her peers faced. Arden never addressed rumors because she didn't need to. Her career thrived on her intelligence, not her image. She built a legacy that defied labels, creating space for complexity in a world that demanded simplicity. She once said that life is too short not to laugh, and maybe that was her secret. Beneath every joke was a woman who had already survived the hardest kind of silence. Mary Martin. Mary Martin floated across stages as Peter Pan, the eternal child who refused to grow up. But offstage, her story was one of careful balance between public perfection and private truth. Hollywood and Broadway adored her wholesome charm, but few knew of her deep bond with fellow star Janet Gaynor. The two shared homes, vacations, and decades of companionship that went far beyond simple friendship. Their husbands were often conveniently present, creating an arrangement that kept tabloids satisfied while the real connection thrived behind closed doors. Friends who knew them privately described a partnership full of loyalty and understanding. Together, they navigated an era where appearances meant survival and love had to wear a mask. Martin's son actor Larry Hagman later hinted that his mother's emotional life was deeper than people realized. That's an understatement. Mary Martin didn't just play a character who could fly. She spent her life walking a tightrope between freedom and facade, loving quietly in a world that never would have let her soar otherwise. Katharine Cornell. Katharine Cornell was called the First Lady of the American stage, but few knew she ruled that kingdom alongside her true partner actress, Nancy Hamilton. Cornell's marriage to director Guthrie McClintock was widely known as a professional alliance, more a production company than a romance. Together, they created legendary plays, but her heart belonged elsewhere. Cornell and Hamilton lived, worked, and traveled together for decades. Within theater circles, their relationship was no secret, but to the outside world, they were simply collaborators. McClintock understood the arrangement and even helped protect their privacy. Cornell mentored dozens of young actresses, many of them struggling with the same secret she carried. Her home became a quiet sanctuary for those who needed safety from gossip and judgment. She proved that power and love could coexist, even if hidden beneath polite smiles. In the history books, Katharine Cornell is remembered as a towering actress, but in truth, she was also one of Broadway's most steadfast champions of hidden love. Jean Acker. Jean Acker might be remembered as Rudolph Valentino's first wife, but their marriage lasted barely a night. The story goes that on their wedding evening, Acker locked Valentino out of their hotel suite, then never let him back in. It wasn't cruelty, it was clarity. Acker was part of the silent era sewing circle, a quiet network of women who lived outside society's definitions. She had romantic ties with powerhouse figures like Alla Nazimova and Grace Darman, living openly among friends even when the public had no clue. The marriage to Valentino was likely a studio setup and image fix for both of them in a time when whispers could end a career. After leaving him, Acker didn't look back. She lived on her own terms, often in the company of women, long before independence was acceptable. The press tried to label her tragic, but history has redefined her as brave. Jean Acker wasn't a failed wife. She was a woman who knew exactly who she was and refused to perform a lie. Frances Farmer. Frances Farmer's story has been told in countless tragic tones, her talent, her rebellion, her confinement. But beneath the chaos was a woman trying to be herself in a world that punished difference. Farmer hated Hollywood's artificiality. She rejected the carefully staged romances the studios planned for her, preferring deep emotional friendships with women she trusted. Her letters from her theater years reveal a woman who felt trapped by expectation. One correspondence to a female colleague was so intimate that biographers still debate whether it reflected romantic longing. She found comfort in creative spaces like New York's theater scene, where artists lived with more honesty, even if quietly. When she was later institutionalized, many said Hollywood broke her. But maybe it was the other way around. Frances Farmer broke Hollywood's illusions. She didn't fit the mold, and she refused to shrink to fit in. In the end, her legacy isn't tragedy, it's defiance. Farmer's truth may have been buried for decades, but it never truly disappeared. Marie Dressler. Marie Dressler was Hollywood's most unexpected star. She wasn't the typical leading lady, older, heavier, and delightfully unpolished, but audiences adored her. Behind that warm humor and motherly presence, however, was a deeply private personal life that quietly defied her era's norms. Dressler never remarried after her husband's death, choosing instead to live for decades with her close companion Nella Webb. They traveled together, shared homes, and were inseparable, even as the press politely described Webb as her secretary. Among friends, though, the truth was clear: they were partners in every way that mattered. Dressler's fame and fortune gave her the freedom to live without pretense. She didn't flaunt her private life, but she didn't apologize for it either. In an age when most actresses were bound by studio image, she carved out her own quiet revolution. Marie Dressler proved that love didn't need a label, it just needed courage. Claire Trevor. Claire Trevor, the queen of film noir, was known for her smoky voice and tragic roles, often playing women with secrets. Turns out she had her own. Though married to director Milton Bren, Trevor's personal life was far richer and more complicated than any script could capture. She surrounded herself with strong women painters, sculptors, writers, and one in particular was rumored to be more than a friend. In the conservative climate of the 1950s, their companionship drew quiet attention, but no headlines. Trevor's talent and reputation shielded her from intrusion. As the years passed, she retreated from the public eye, devoting herself to art and philanthropy. Friends recalled her as deeply affectionate and fiercely private. She never needed to confirm or deny the whispers because she'd already outgrown Hollywood's need for performance. Claire Trevor wasn't defined by scandal or secrecy. She was defined by grace and the quiet power of living life on her own terms. So what do these stories tell us? That behind Hollywood's perfect smiles were women fighting private wars against studios, against society, and sometimes against themselves. Their courage wasn't loud, but it was real. They shaped cinema, inspired generations, and proved that love, even when hidden, leaves a permanent mark. So if this hidden history moved you, hit like, share it, and subscribe, because some stories deserve to be whispered no longer. Their truth still shines through the real,